The second thing that you had going off of my list here was progressive values for women lead to less fulfilling lives for progressive women on average. That was the other one that you took contention with. Am I right there?
Or I would just like, I guess I'd like to hear you elaborate more on it. I've heard conservatives say that women fulfilling traditional roles tend to be happier. Is that kind of the crux of your argument?
Well, it depends on what you mean by a traditional role. So I think people get these confused a bit. I think that a lot of times progressive women are thinking like 1930s or 40s utopian nuclear family dynamic household leave it to beaver style. But that's not actually correct. When we're talking about tradition, we're just basically doing everything within the frame of the religious. So when we're talking about progressive values, they're all based on secularism. So they have nothing to base anything on except their own subjective preferences. And so they end up in this kind of quagmire of contention. But if you want to just go off of empirics, the mental illness for women is off the charts in comparison to men. It's in fact, even seeking professionals for women is off the charts in comparison to men. So is the rates that they attempt in adolescent suicide in comparatively to men. As the society, in other words, has become more egalitarian across the board, women seem to be suffering more, not less. In fact, there's a paper here which I can link you, and this paper cites it pretty good. It's called an evolutionary. I'm sorry. It's a the paradox of the leadership gaps and the paradox of the gaps when it comes to mental health in women. It asks the question, how come gains in women's rights haven't made women any happier? How come that hasn't actually done anything to produce these happy women that feminism promised us when feminism first began through the suffragettes? Like, what's the what's the aim here? What is the aim of feminism if not a happier, better society for women? Why are they all so fucking miserable the more egalitarian they get?
Um, I guess it depends whether you value hedonism or not. I don't know if a lot of people consider happiness and pleasure as like the ultimate goal of life. Like, I think a woman could say, maybe I'm happier, like less happy in this situation, but I don't necessarily regret it. I think a lot of people do like pursuing something that gives them a sense of purpose. But I don't know if necessarily pursuing something that gives you purpose leads to more pleasure in your life.
Yeah, but what would be your explanation for women having more trouble with mental health and reporting in almost every single individual aspect of their life that they're more miserable than when the polls that came before polled them in years past, where they're saying that they were much happier? And society had a much larger gap between men and women with what women were allowed to do, including things like bank accounts, things like this. I mean, we've definitely come a long way with feminism, especially in the last 40 years, but the miserable index for women is at an all-time high. I can't fathom how that could be possible as we close this gap if feminism is accomplishing its goal, why women are more miserable under it.
I don't know if this is necessarily the answer, but I would say that if you asked me 10 years ago when I'm like 13 years old, if I have anxiety, I would say no, because I don't really have necessarily the self understanding of what that means. Versus if you ask me now, I'd say yes. I don't think that necessarily means that I have more anxiety or that my life is worse than it was 10 years ago. I would say by every metric, my life is significantly better and that I'm significantly more fulfilled. So I think likewise, if women are kind of relegated to the household into traditional roles and they're kind of isolated and they can't really A/B test what life is like outside of it, then I think it's easier to dismiss negative feelings. Like I think you need to have
So wait, hang on. I
positive
just want to
feelings
make
to
sure I
feel
got
negative
this
and vice
right.
versa.
I want to make sure I got this right. I want you to understand that the argument you just made was you said it's because those dumb housewives haven't experienced anything outside of being dumb housewives. So basically, it's blissful in their ignorance. That's what you're saying.
I don't know if I would say dumb. I would say sometimes, hmm. For instance, I think they would. I saw a statistic that says in some countries, like in less developed countries, people there also report more happiness. But I don't think the average Western person would say that they have a better life necessarily. Like, I think we could look at them and say, okay, there are ways in which they have in some ways a lower quality of life, right? So that's why I don't know if just the self-reporting on happiness is a good enough indication.
Well, no, that wouldn't be, but have the information right here. More than a quarter of American women, 26%, take drugs, which include antidepressants. 26%. That more than a quarter of all women take antidepressants.
What is it, Andrew? What is it? What is it? What is it for
26,
men?
what's that?
What is that number for men? Just so we have a comparison.
Varies between 12 to 15%.
Okay, got it.
So it's much lower. Okay, much lower. Same thing with antipsychotics. Okay, women aren't doing so hot. And all this egalitarianism that you've been pushing for, that has been going full throttle. You've been getting everything that you feminists have wanted. And when it's delivered unto you, you seem to go batshit fucking crazy. Isn't that weird? Isn't that odd to you?
I think the number of people on antidepressants has gone up in general, even for men, right?
Slightly, yes. But the deviation between men and women.
What would you attribute that uptick in male usage of antidepressants to?
I would say it's due to male oppression. The fact that men have been systematically oppressed inside of the United States under these horrific egalitarian laws, where we don't have egalitarianism at all, but rather we get raped in divorce courts. The laws are fundamentally unfair. And for the same crime that a woman is charged with, men are unfairly punished. The suicide rates of men are sky high in comparison to women. They get the job done. It's not that women don't attempt it, but it's mostly a cry out for help because they take pills and then they call somebody and say, I took some pills, come save me. They put that up to a suicide attempt, whereas men just get the job done, right? They just take a gun and that's the way that they end up handling that. So all of these things, I would say that men are unfairly oppressed in society, and that's led to a slight uptick. And there seems to be enough correlates there for me to make such a bold claim. But I would like to still know, because we seem to just be begging the question, why in the world do you think that women who have more egalitarianism now than ever before, have more of these gaps closed than ever before, are more fucking miserable than ever before?
Wait, I first have a question on something you said. So if men kind of establish the framework of rights and happiness, why is it that men are the ones disproportionately facing oppression in society?
Well, remember what I said earlier, that men also oppress men, that men are the mechanism for that as well. I don't blame women for this. That's not the crux of my argument. I still think that men are the responsible party when it comes to the oppression in general of other men.
But why in this are they disproportionately affecting men more than women? If men are the ones who are, like you said,
it's not disproportionately affecting women more than it is men. It's just that in this particular case, when you're talking about the uptick, the slight uptick in things like suicidality and things like this, it's because the laws, which are on the books, tend to favor women, because women are a great consumer arm for corporate America. They're in charge of most of the money. Literally, they're in charge of almost all consumer spending. So laws are kind of tailored to kiss their ass. Corporations and lobbyists have gone out of their way under feminism to make sure that women's asses are kissed, and men seem to suffer greatly because of that.
Okay, so men create a framework that oppresses men so that they can make more money off female consumer spending?
Is that what I said? Is that honestly what you think I said? I need to know. Is that honestly what you think I just said?
I'm asking.
Yeah, I know you're asking, but you're asking a question that's not in relationship to anything I just said. So the question doesn't even make sense. So what just happened would be like, if I walk over to a guy and I say, what color do you want me to paint your fence? And he looks at me and he says, margarine hat. Be like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? You might be asking me a question, but it's not in relationship to anything I just said. So do you want to ask me a question in relationship to something I actually said?
Sure. Can you summarize what your point was then?
Yes, my point is that, again, as countries have become more and more egalitarian under feminism, and this is feminist women and feminist men who are coming together under the same banner of I Heart Women's Rights, it's become more egalitarian. Why is it that the index for all of these mental illnesses and problems for women are through the roof, when feminism made the promise that these things should necessarily decrease?
feminism made the promise that mental illness for women would go down.
That all
I thought
aspects of
feminism was
women,
about
that the
ensuring equal
quality,
opportunity. I don't know if feminism
that
is
the
promising that
quality
you're going to
of
be happy
women's
together.
lives would greatly increase. It has not seemingly done that, unless you think that a woman's quality of life is not impacted by mental illness, which I would say it is, especially if 25% are on an antipsychotic, antidepressant, or some variation thereof.
I don't know if that's necessarily feminism's fault. Like you just said, we're in a framework in which sometimes laws are created to that like disaffect people mentally, like you just pointed to the divorce courts. I guess I'm just trying to wonder, why are you attributing the uptick in women's mental illness to feminism singularly? Like, how come you don't think it's just an effect of just, I don't know, other consequences of modernization?
Because women are the ones who have pushed, and feminists, male feminists as well, have pushed for egalitarianism. And across the board, in nations we see that become more egalitarian, we see this huge gap increase between men and women when it comes to women, A, wanting to do things that are more in line with their gender, which is a bizarre side effect feminists never want to talk about, but also that their state of mental happiness and mental health seems to rapidly deteriorate, which is fucking bizarre. These are, we can link this because we can look at other countries that have way more egalitarianism than even the United States, and we see similar numbers.
Yeah, I guess I should probably read more about those studies and then we can reconvene at a later time. I don't want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all that's all I really had, to be honest. I don't know where we go from there.